In this lecture, we'll take a look at a couple more case studies. The first one we'll take a look at today is a privacy versus security issue about an event that occurred in Athens, Greece. The next case study we'll take a look at involves wiretapping. Now, modern telecommunications networks have created significant problems for law enforcement. And this is because over the past century, state and federal law enforcement officers have come to rely on the ability to set up what are called wiretaps. These just allow the officers to intercept and record phone conversations between suspected criminals. Now, as phone technology has changed, it's become more complicated to set up wiretaps. And this is because prior to this technology, to tap a wire, you just need a piece of hardware and just connect it to the wire. It's just a physical connection. And then they can listen to the local exchange and then have a recording device that would be set to record all the calls. But today, it doesn't work that way as much anymore. That's because a lot of households don't even have landline phones anymore. More people are turning to cell phones and also internet phone technology, which is known as Voice over Internet Protocol, or VoIP for their communications. And this has definitely complicated the ability to wiretap conversations because it's a little difficult to wiretap if you don't have a physical wire. So that's become more complicated. Like I said, it's just kind of hard to do it without a physical wire or to be able to hook the piece of hardware to tap the conversation. Now, in the mid-1990s, law enforcement officials did see these problems coming. So they did start working with the phone providers, phone companies, and also start working with internet service providers to build these types of law intercept systems, or LI systems. But it seemed like some of the smaller companies really weren't going to do it unless they were forced to do it. So several countries, including the US, passed laws that required all telecommunication providers, so this included all phone companies and all internet service providers, to build some type of lawful intercept system. I mean, it would cost a lot of money. So, I mean, there was some hesitation, but since they were required to do it, they had to do it. So they had to incorporate some type of LI capability in all their systems. Now, critics of the lawful intercept system were worried that it would be a very tempting target for computer hackers. And that's because modern LI systems allow an authorized user to create a wiretap just by filling in a few blanks in a program. That's it. We didn't need to attach any hardware to create a wiretap anymore. So because all these phone calls now travel through computers as streams of data, it can be very easy to copy that data and store it as it flows by. It's really easy to intercept that kind of data. It's even possible to forward phone calls to another number. So every time a phone call is placed from a monitored number, the police officer's phone would ring, and then he or she can pick up and listen in on the call in real time. So for spies, this would be very, very attractive for them. I mean, just imagine, if you will, if you could listen in on every call that an important figure makes, like the president or some other authoritative figure, or listen to the phone calls of finance ministers or heads of major corporations. Just be able to get that inside information can be a huge security issue. And this is exactly what happened to Greece in 2004. There was an unknown group of people who broke into the LI system for a major cellular phone vendor in Greece, and they installed illegal wiretaps on over 100 important Greek business leaders and politicians. This even included the prime minister. So from June 2004 through February 2005, hackers used the LI system to forward calls from tap numbers to a series of shadow phones, in which allowed the hackers to listen in on conversations. I mean, this was a massive tapping in scope, and it went undetected for 7 months. I mean, no one knew about it for almost an entire year. And what's even more concerning is that law enforcement officials still don't know anything about it to this day. They don't know who did it. They don't know why they did it. They don't have anything about it. And it gets better from here because they completely botched up the investigation. I mean, important access logs were destroyed. Hackers got tipped off that authorities were onto them. So they just never got any information from this at all. They have no idea who did it, why did it, how, or anything about it. They just know that it happened. So for this particular case study, we're going to look at the following ethical question. How does In the last case study, we used utilitarian arguments to explore ethical questions about MP3 copying. But in this case study, we're going to use a different approach. We're going to be using an argument by analogy. So, analogies are commonplace, and it's one of the reasons why they can be a useful way to think about ethical concerns. Most people are familiar and comfortable with the idea of explaining something less well known by comparing it with something better known. Like, for example, maybe you're trying to describe what some type of food tastes like, and you could say something like, it tastes like chicken, but a little drier. Would be one way to, it'd be one example of an analogy. But when we apply analogies to ethics, we need to be a little more careful about it. We can apply it. We can use analogies for arguing ethical issues because it can transfer our understandings and intuitions about something well known to a situation or an entity that is less well known. There are going to be some similarities and differences. We just got to make sure we're careful with the analogies that we use. And they do serve several purposes in ethical reasoning. So when an analogy fits well, it helps us take advantage of decisions we've made in the past, because if the two situations are pretty similar, then we can apply the solution for the original problem to the new one. But if the analogy doesn't fit well, that's not bad. It still gives us some information, because if it doesn't fit, and if we can identify the mismatch in the analogy where it doesn't fit, it usually highlights some ethically significant aspect of this case. For our analysis of lawful intercept, we're going to consider two analogies that bear directly on privacy concerns that are raised by LI. So the first analogy is that lawful intercept is like requiring everyone to record their face-to-face conversations. So this analogy focuses more on internet VoIP phone systems such as Skype, but most of our arguments would apply equally well to cellular phone systems because they have very similar technologies. So the idea with this, it's pretty simple. So if you have two people that have a private conversation, why does it need to be recorded? It shouldn't have to be recorded so other people can listen to it. Before all this technology came in, all these conversations were private anyway. So why do we need to have these private conversations recorded now? Let's now analyze the analogy here. So in this case, we can see some clear similarities between face-to-face communication and internet phone calls. They're similar in that people want to communicate with each other, and that both types are meant to include a limited number of people. In both types of communication, however, the actual audience may be larger than intended. So in a voice conversation, people may be eavesdropping either by being physically close but unnoticed by the speakers. They could be eavesdropping by using a hidden microphone or even by distant listening devices. And then with VoIP, the conversation may be intercepted at any number of places because we have this electronic path between the sender and the receiver, so it could be picked up anywhere along this path. Now, if there were a system that made it easy to listen in on private conversations, there may be some justification to be worried that law enforcement officials or hackers could abuse it. Both lawful intercept systems and the carrying microphone system in the analogy could be abused. In U.S. society, private conversations are by default free from government intrusion. It's not an absolute right. There are court orders that can be attained by law enforcement to use technology that would invade the private physical conversations, but these are exceptions to that rule. So unless law enforcement can demonstrate probable cause, they're not allowed to take any measures to listen in on private physical conversations. In both cases, both VoIP and face-to-face conversations, there is a trade-off between privacy and security. In the case of face-to-face conversation, our society has decided to not record all conversations all the time, but we will allow law enforcement to record certain conversations if they can demonstrate that there is a need to do so. So what are the implications of this analogy? Well, it implies that requiring lawful intercept for all internet phone equipment would be the same as requiring everyone to record all of their private conversations and then provide recordings to the government as needed. If lawful intercept capabilities were not built into VoIP hardware, law enforcement's powers could be the same as in the case of face-to-face conversation. Now, law enforcement could still get a warrant and then physically eavesdrop on one end of the conversation. With sufficiently powerful microphones, they would be able to hear both ends of the conversation. So the conclusion seems to be that lawful intercept should not be built into VoIP hardware. We'll now take a look at some problems with the analogy, because the conclusion we just reached may conflict with your intuition about the case. Notice that the argument we made applies to normal phone tapping as well as tapping VoIP. We know that most people accept the fact that we need the occasional use of regular phone taps. So this seems to indicate a problem with our analogy. So our analogy must have left out some ethically significant factor. And this demonstrates another powerful use of the analogy, which is to discover which parts of the case are most ethically relevant. I mean, sometimes when we make an analogy, the answer does not match the intuition. And this could be because the intuition is wrong. It could be because the analogy doesn't fit. So if we can precisely describe how the analogy doesn't fit, it often identifies some ethically relevant part of the case that we haven't considered yet. So we have to ask ourselves, where is the mismatch in this analogy? And there are several reasonable criticisms, but the one big problem is that there's only 3 significant parties in this case. We have the 2 parties that are in the conversation, and we have the government. In the case of lawful intercept, there is a very significant 4th party, the telecommunications company. I mean, we've already mentioned that it's absurd that we would require individuals to record their own conversations and provide them to the government. That was our analogy. But what if there was another party that was already well positioned to record this conversation? Or could the government require that party to do so and hand over the recordings? And this is exactly the case with internet phone services. The internet service provider is always in a position to record calls, and they can provide it to the government. Our current analogy doesn't seem to shed any light on this. So in our process of dialectic reasoning, this causes us to look for a different analogy that has this middleman feature. So we need to try a different analogy that includes this.